Firstly, obviously, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I stand, the Gimoi, Wallabara, Yidinji and Yiddiganji peoples. I pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and I bring greetings from my peoples, the Quandamuka peoples, from Manduraba or North Stradbroke Island, just off the coast of Brisbane. And I acknowledge that all of you are gathering and meeting on the lands of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people where you are, and we all always pay our respects to those elders past and present and the peoples of those countries, and thank them for allowing us to be on their lands and their waters. Thank you all for joining today. My name's Dean Parkin and I'm the director of From the Heart, which is a campaign to drive public support for the Uluru Statement from the Heart, and in particular the voice to Parliament that must be enshrined in the Constitution. I've had the great pleasure of meeting many of you already in person and more recently online, as we are all working our way through the various challenges that COVID has presented all of us. So I'd like to thank you for your ongoing support, your continuing support that grows stronger and more confident by the day. And there's thousands of people that are following the progress of the campaign, thousands of people, both Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander and non-Indigenous Australians, who have been supporting since the Uluru Statement was created back in 2017, and that it's wonderful and incredibly heartening to see that support grow and deepen, and we're looking to now, at a really critical part of the campaign, put that support to work. It's been one of the great questions that I've had all the way through, and all of us who have been arguing the case for Uluru all the way through. What can I do to support? On every single call, in every single event, that is the guaranteed question that will be asked. Well, I'm here to say that there is the chance to do something that has a real impact and is incredibly meaningful for the movement in general. So that's what I'm here to talk to you about today, about the week of action and what we're planning to do in and around that. And I just wanted to use this opportunity, use this webinar as a chance to share some information about what we're trying to achieve, and what some of the challenges are around what we're trying to do with the week of action. And hopefully we'll have some time at the end for you to ask some questions. And my colleague Tom is helping co-host this this webinar, and Tom, I think you might be, yeah, there he is. I'm sending a message to everyone. If you could please send your questions to Tom, and he will collate them, and hopefully we get some common questions that I can answer towards the end of the session, as much as we possibly can. And if we don't get to your questions during this session, we'll still take them on board, and there'll be something that we can address as we move the campaign forward. So I'm just going to share a quick presentation just to talk through the week of action, and hopefully that then provides people with a bit more clarity about what we're trying to achieve. So just to reiterate, From the Heart is a campaign. It's a nation building campaign, and it's got 4 key goals. It's about building awareness and understanding about the Uluru Statement from the Heart. It's absolutely about promoting a constitutionally protected voice to Parliament for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. I think it's really important, and I say this every time I have these conversations. Uluru Statement and the people that were involved in the Uluru Statement from the Heart insisted upon the voice being enshrined in the Constitution. It didn't call for a legislated voice only or some other form of a voice. And so the only mandate that we have as a campaign, the only mandate that we have as supporters of the Uluru Statement from the Heart, is that concept that the voice must be enshrined in the Constitution. We need to mobilise, and this is starting to happen as we speak, mobilise Australians in a movement of support for a referendum on a voice. And ultimately, when it all boils down to it, It's sometimes when you're working in the space of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities and issues, it's hard to understand whether you've been successful or not, or you're having an impact or not. Well, for us, it will be very, very clear when the referendum is held, and the success will be historic. And all of you who are our supporters and who have been there with us and continue to walk with us will absolutely be part of making that history. So yes, the final goal is to achieve a yes vote in a referendum on a voice to Parliament. I just want to set the scene a little bit around why this moment, why we are approaching a really important, a really critical time in the campaign. It's possibly the most critical time that we are approaching now since the Uluru Statement was first created 3.5 years ago. And I think it's important to understand a little bit of the context about why we're reaching this really critical moment. So back in 2017, the Joint Select Committee on Constitutional Recognition, that was co-chaired by Senator Pat Dodson from Labor and Julie and Lisa from the Coalition. They looked at the Uluru Statement from the heart. In fact, they looked at a whole bunch of processes that had happened even before the Uluru Statement, and was really wrestling with this question of trying to map a clear way forward for the question of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander constitutional recognition. As part of their report, they made 2 key recommendations about the voice to Parliament, and they recommended that there should be a 2-stage process to establish a voice. The first recommendation was around there needed to be some co-design with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people on what a voice might look like. This is just to give confidence to both Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and the general public that there's nothing to fear here. This is a very simple, a very practical, a very fair proposition that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have a voice over their own affairs and their own issues, and that there's no need for the somewhat mischievous scare campaigns that have been unfortunately run against some of these positions since the Uluru Statement. So let's do that co-design process first. That was the first recommendation. The second recommendation said very clearly that following that process of co-design, in a deliberate and a timely way, the government should consider the constitutional, the legislative, and the executive arrangements for the voice. So do step 1 first, co-design. Look at what the model might look like, the form of the model, the functions of the voice, and how all that kind of works. Do that process first. Once that process is finished, then we look at how to bring the voice to life. And obviously our position is that it should be enshrined in the Constitution. It's really important to note that there has been bipartisanship or multi-partisanship on constitutional recognition for some time now, and that actually both the government and the opposition had policies that they promised to the Australian people at the last election on the question of constitutional recognition and a voice. And it was really clear that the governments effectively accepted the Joint Select Committee's 2 recommendations of co-design and then considering the constitutional and legislative options. So they said in their election platform that they took to the last election, they allocated $7.3 million for a co-design process. So that's the process that Minister Ken Wyatt is running now, that Professor Marcia Langton and Tom Calmer are co-chairs of running that process through. So that was established about a year ago. So the government delivered upon that part of their process and said that they delivered upon that part of their election commitment by establishing that, and that's the process that we're talking about today. But there was a very clear commitment at the election that a referendum will be held once a model is settled, consistent with the recommendations of the Joint Select Committee, which I just talked about earlier. So that's the government's election commitment. That's an election promise that's been made last year. And then the Prime Minister confirmed this in his closing the gap speech earlier this year. And he talked about the Joint Select Committee, and it said it didn't make recommendations as to the legal form. It recommended this 2-stage process. And it said he said it recommended considering this matter after the process of co-design is complete, and that's what we are doing. what we are doing. We are supporting co-design first. So you've had the Joint Select Committee with the two very clear recommendations. You've had the government with an election commitment going into the election last year. And you have the Prime Minister speaking to the Parliament earlier this year saying the government's position is that there is a two-stage process. We're doing co-design first and we'll consider the constitutional arrangements after that process is finished. So I just wanted to put that out there as context because it's really important about what we're trying to achieve with the campaign. And it's also because there's been a certain level of misreporting on what the government's position is or isn't, or what has been ruled in or out. It's very clear that the election commitment and the Prime Minister's commitment is absolutely to this two-stage process. And in fact, the election commitment goes further and says that a referendum will be held once a model has been settled. So that's the government's position. It's really clear, and so that gives us ample opportunity to continue to make the case for the constitutional enshrinement of the voice. So we are now, in terms of that first step, in terms of that co-design process, we're really coming to a very, very critical moment. The committee was set up about a year ago. The committee process, Minister Wyatt announced the co-design process to commence in October last year. And as I said before, Professor Marcia Langton and Tom Calmer were chosen as co-chairs of that committee process. And they were really tasked with looking through what had been previously designed in terms of previous national voices and local and regional options, looking at all of the existing structures that are there. So there's a whole bunch of work that this committee has been doing over the last 12 months. And they're reaching a stage now where they've got an interim report. It hasn't been publicly released yet, but this second stage is where that will happen. So as I understand it, the government's commitment is that by the end of this year, it will go to a public consultation on the interim report on the model options for a voice. And that process will run through the remainder of December, January, February, and March next year. And then they'll look to finalize in the last stage of co-design, they'll look to finalize the report sometime potentially in the first half of next year. So this consultation process is absolutely critical. It's open to all Australians, not just Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. All Australians will get to have their say on what this co-design committee has come to at this point in time. And so this, for us as a campaign, when campaigns are built on critical moments, and this is absolutely a critical moment. This is a very positive and constructive opportunity for us to make our voices really, really heard and heard very, very loudly about what we think is important and what's important about what the government is proposing in terms of the voice model. So that's 4-month window or 3.5-month window, and granted it is over the Christmas and New Year's break too, which makes it somewhat challenging. But that period of time is our opportunity to press as hard as we possibly can in as large as numbers as we possibly can, and reinforcing the key messages that the Uluru Statement has called for, what Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have been calling for many, many years. So we don't know exactly the date. This is the challenging thing for how we are setting up the week of action. We don't know exactly. There are government processes that need to be gone through, cabinet consideration and so forth. So we don't have a date yet and when that report will go public, but that's what we're shaping the week of action around, that moment when the report does go public. I mentioned the government's position before. This is very much our position. This isn't about what the report says because it hasn't been released yet. But this is what we would say, that we want the report, or we'd certainly want the final report and the final options for a voice. These two key points shouldn't be any surprise to anybody. We've been very consistent and very clear on this as supporters of the Uluru Statement from the Heart, as the From the Heart campaign, that the first key position for us is that the government must honour its election commitment to a referendum and enshrine an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice in the Constitution. That's not going to shock anybody. It's no surprise. Honour the election commitment to enshrine a voice. The second point is important that people understand the nuance behind this one, that the enabling legislation for the voice must be passed after a referendum has been held in the next term of Parliament. So that point does a couple of things. One, it says, let's not kick the can down the road anymore. We've run 5 or 6 processes within the last decade about this question on constitutional recognition. The time now is for action and to make it happen. We know that the Australian people are ready for it and will support it. So it's time that we just come to terms with the question of constitutional recognition. We must have a referendum in the next term of Parliament. The existing commitment actually was for a referendum this term of Parliament, but it's understandable given the coronavirus and the havoc that has wrought on many elements of our lives, that there wasn't a referendum this term of Parliament. That's understandable. However, we can't keep putting this off, and so we're saying that it must be in the next term of Parliament. The question of timing on the legislation is really important, and you might have heard variously over the course of the last few years in the various debates about this. Some people have said, well, why don't we just give it a bit of a trial run first? We legislate the voice first, we give it a bit of a trial, and we'll see what happens, and then maybe later on down the track, we'll think about putting it in the Constitution, or even just a suggestion that we should just legislate and not even really consider the constitutional part of it. In our view, and after considering this in many different ways over the years, if there is a move to legislate the voice without having had the referendum first, it is very unlikely that we will ever see the constitutional enshrinement of the voice. Basically, if it's legislated without having gone through the referendum, the constitutional enshrinement of the voice is, for all intents and purposes, off the table. And there's a number of sort of practical reasons as to why that's the case, and we will detail this more in our submission when we make our submission to the public consultation process. But effectively, the voice has to have it has to give contested advice to governments. It's not about just going with the flow and agreeing with everything government says. At times, the voice is going to disagree rather strongly with government policies and legislation because Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples know how these things work in their communities, and sometimes those ideas differ quite strongly from government. So giving advice and speaking to the Parliament and speaking to the government is going to be a contested space. And it is unlikely that any government on the receiving end of that advice is going to be willing to make that further step to enshrine the voice in the Constitution. It's not going to necessarily like it. And if it doesn't like it, it's unlikely that it will then support a referendum to entrench it in the Constitution. That's the first reason. We also know that the voice in the first few years will be a startup organisation. It'll be new, it'll have new functions and new processes. These things take time to bed down. No doubt at some stage mistakes and inefficiencies will be made in this new voice. And so opponents of the voice and opponents of constitutional recognition will look at those inefficiencies and mistakes and argue that well, there's no way we should enshrine this in the Constitution because clearly it doesn't work well. We strongly believe that it will work well and that it'll work through any initial early problems, but that's another argument as to why it won't. And then finally, perversely, if it works really well and starts acting as we know that it will, there'll be the old sort of if it ain't broke, don't fix it argument. Why do we need to go to a referendum? Why do we need to enshrine it in the Constitution? It's already working. Let's just leave it alone. And the problem with that is that we'll end up in the same situation that every single one of the previous voices found itself in at some point. It gets to a point where it becomes inconvenient or the advice is not well received. There's a change in government or there's a change in policy. a decision is made to defund or do away with or otherwise abolish, and we end up with another national voice, another one biting the dust. And I went back and looked at the course of my lifetime. There's been at least 4 national voices in my lifetime. I'm not yet 40 years old, so we can sort of count on that any iteration of the voice without the constitutional underpinning, at best case scenario, it's got about a decade's worth of effective life before we start this all over again. And to be honest, we know what needs to happen. We know the change that needs to happen. We know what the problem and the challenges and the opportunities are. And if I'm really honest, I don't want to spend the rest of my life coming back every 10 years trying to work out another version of what the representative body should look like. Let's just do it properly. Let's do it well. Let's do it as Uluru called for. Let's enshrine it in the Constitution. So we've got this opportunistic moment in terms of the public consultations on the models for the voice, and we've got a very, very clear mandate. We've got a government policy that supports constitutional enshrinement and a referendum on a voice, and we've got our very, very clear mandate from the Uluru Statement that's driving us forward. So we're proposing to run a week of action that is timed around the launch of the public consultations. And I want to make it really clear that this is about the people and it's not about the politicians. We have and will continue to obviously engage all levels of government and different types of governments. And there'll be a time a bit further on through this sort of period of the campaign where we'll have to do more of that. But right now, this is about people power. This is about having a conversation directly with the Australian people and them having their view on what's important. And so there'll be suggestions that we should do all sorts of different types of engagements. I want to emphasize that this is about you. It's about Australians from all walks of life having their say. And so we want to make that happen as much as possible. So a couple of really key objectives: just raise public awareness about the consultation process and inform people about our submission. And I'll talk a little bit about that later on. What we would then like to do, the really key challenge in any campaign is translating good intentions and a heartfelt support into action. We need people to read our submission, understand the key points, and then ideally, we'd like to have a large number of people putting in their own high quality individual submissions. This isn't about doing one kind of template submission that we can just send out to everybody and people sign and send it in. That's not very effective in these committee processes. They tend to be seen as, even though there'll be potentially hundreds or even thousands, they tend to be seen as kind of one submission. The most powerful thing that we can possibly do in this process right now, in this part of the campaign, is for individual Australians to put their view forward. Individual Australians to put forward the things that are important to them in support of a voice as described in the Uluru Statement from the Heart. So people will be able to put their own submission in according to what's important to them. Ideally, the week of action from us is getting people to support our key positions to drive that wave of support. And that's the third objective, is to build and demonstrate a wave of public support from a wide range of people. I keep saying, as others have heard me on previous calls and forums, we need to really reach out to the unusual suspects. There are some of our core supporters. We need you to keep being our core supporters and to keep getting in behind, and this is a really important thing to do. But we need to reach out and bring different people on board that who might not necessarily be who we think are intuitive supporters of the voice, but actually are. And when that starts to happen, that will turn heads. That will turn heads in politics, in government, in the media, in just in our communities. It'll be a critical moment, a critical tipping point. So I'd encourage you with all your networks when we start talking about the actions through the week of action and beyond, to think about those people who you know, and try and engage as broadly as you possibly can. So the other thing I just want to emphasize before I go on, the week of action is very much about focus as well. And we know that there are multiple elements of the Uluru Statement from the Heart. There is voice, there's treaty, and there's truth. And all of those are important. We are 100% in behind all of the key reforms in the Uluru Statement. But the week of action, necessarily because of this key moment, because of this consultation process that is deliberately set up around the voice, we have to focus our efforts and our energies on driving forward for the constitutional enshrinement of the voice. It's tempting, I know, to comment on a whole range of issues and to be involved in a whole range of issues all the time. We sort of got to keep our powder dry a little bit and keep our eye really firmly focused on the target that's in front of us, which is this consultation process. So I do say it is definitely about the people, and if we can focus it as much as we can on calling for the voice to be enshrined in the Constitution and ensuring that the legislation comes after the referendum, then we're going to really start to have a huge impact. So what can I do to preempt any of the questions that might be flowing through to Tom already? So now what you can do, we have the Uluru Statement canvas on our website. And this is just an opportunity for people to post a photo and post a very, very short message around, why the Uluru Statement's important to them. We're over 2,000, well over 2,000 people who've done that now, and it's looking absolutely fantastic. And it is looking amazing to see people from different walks of life showing why it's important to them and telling why it's important to them. So if you haven't already, I'd ask you to sign the canvas, and that's really in signing in empathy with and alongside with the people who, as like myself, who signed the original Uluru Statement canvas back in 2017. So you can find more information about the canvas on our From the Heart website. As with anything, please share the canvas. Share your canvas, share your message on Facebook. And we'd encourage people to place the From the Heart logo on your Facebook profile picture. I think you get information about how to do that when you do sign up. Regardless, we'll send out some information this afternoon through our social media channels about how you go about doing that, just to make that as easy as possible. If you're like me and you're not a tech head, it's sometimes daunting, so we'll try and make that as easy as possible for people to do. When the week of action starts, this is when rubber really hits the road. We'd like people to read our submission. And we'll have different versions of that. We'll have the full submission that people can read in response to the interim co-design report. And we'll also have some brief summaries and some really key crunchy points to say, look, if you make no other point in support of our position, if you make these couple of points, that will go a long way into turning that into really strong action. So read the submission and make your own submission in support of our positions on the voice. Even just the term, for those that haven't been involved in it previously, it can sound a little bit daunting. It can sound like a huge process, and we've got to have lots of pages and lots of, we've got to try and make it look like we're really across this. It can be as simple as a couple of sentences. It can be as simple as a paragraph. It doesn't have to be longer than a page. You can write a academic style submission, or you can write something that is just purely from your own heart about why this is important to you. Hopefully, ideally from our perspective, guided by our points, but it's up to you what you want to write, and we'd encourage people not to necessarily even cut and paste the words that are there, to look at them, understand the points, and then put them in your own words as to why you're taking that position. So it will be a very simple thing, but I can't emphasize enough, it's going to be a very profound thing if we can drive high numbers of those individual submissions going through. We'll have a schedule for the week of action. So the week of action is absolutely focused around the launch of the consultation report. The ultimate goal of the week of action is to drive that first week, or very early on in that process, large numbers of submissions that are supportive of our position. It's about raising the awareness and getting momentum going early. But we're also going to have a number of different smaller activities that people can do. Really simple things like putting, a Facebook profile on your picture. It's about telling stories. It's about doing a picture or making a short video. We've got some training coming up. So there's an organization we're working with to design, I guess if you like, advocacy training. So for a lot of people have said, how do we have a conversation around the Uluru Statement? I'd like to, but I find it a bit challenging. This training course is really short, only a couple of hours, but it'll give people the tools and the confidence that they need to then go out and be really effective advocates. So there'll be things like signing up for that training. There'll be just small things like that we'd like to do, just to give that sense of action and give that sense of momentum. So we'll release that schedule of actions as we get closer to the event. And I am getting some people coming up and saying, look, we're ready to go now. What are the actions and how can I start doing them? We want to keep our powder dry. We want to keep our powder dry and focus when the consultations go public. And then finally, as I say with everything, just share what you're doing. It is about creating momentum and creating a sense that lots of people are getting behind this. So that'll be really important. Once you do it, share it as widely as you possibly can with your networks. So what we will provide, we'll provide the starting date when we know it. Until then, we're effectively getting ready. We're informing as many people as we possibly can, and I encourage you to do that also. We'll have some guidelines on making a submission. So we're really easy how-to guide about what you need to do, as I talked about before, in terms of making that happen. We'll have our own submission, as I said, with easy to access key points and summaries. So for those that will want to read the full document when it's released, you'll be able to do that. But for those that we just want to understand the real core of it, we'll make that very easy for that to happen as well. We'll release a schedule of the daily actions in advance, so people can get creative about how they want to participate. And we'll have a number of tools and collateral like posters and social media tiles and things like that'll be really useful for you to then participate in those various daily activities and actions. So that's pretty much it in terms of what the week of action is, why we're doing it, and what we're hoping to achieve. We need to try and keep the focus up, keep the readiness up, so that when that moment comes, when the report is released, we hit go and watch the people move in support of the campaign. So I'll just say we'll continue to be in touch. Continue to follow our website and our social media channels for more information, and hopefully when we're ready to go, you'll know about it, and all the information will be there for you on our website, including our submission, including all the guides and all the tools. It will be there on our website, and we'll make that widely known. So just want to thank you again for your time. Thank you for your support. It's incredibly meaningful, and we'll be in touch soon with more information about the week of action. So thank you very much. I think we might just end it there and give everybody an early spell. That's a nice way to finish. Thanks, guys.